Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Beta Bay podcast. And I'm very excited today because I have Kristina Campbell here on the line. And Kristina is an appraiser, and I'm a real estate broker, so it's like chocolate and peanut butter. Two great jobs that go great together. So, a lot of people don't know how important appraisers are, but, so much of a lot of people's net worth really is intimately entwined with the work of appraisers. So a lot of you, I think, will find this to be a pretty interesting conversation. So Kristina, you want to first introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kristina Campbell. I work for myself. My business is called Coast Home Appraisal, and I've been appraising in Santa Cruz County for 12 years, and I was studying appraisal even prior to that, so 14 years overall experience since the beginning of my journey. And I've been lucky enough to focus only in Santa Cruz County, where I live, for I'd probably say about 8 years. I have not been working outside the county at all, so I'm not going to Santa Clara or Monterey at all. And I really enjoy meeting homeowners, and it's actually it's a fun job. I love meeting homeowners. I love meeting realtors and connecting with people in the community.
Great. So how did you come to be an appraiser?
I was a little baby out of college. I went to UCSC, and I majored actually in theater with a focus on dance. I had just danced my whole life, and that's just what I wanted to do when I was young in college. But I got out and I had my BA, but I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be a dancer. And so I just happened to, get this older friend. He was around 40, and I was only about 22, and he was a mortgage, a loan officer. And he actually tried to get me to become a real estate agent. And I was like, who's going to buy, a piece of property from such a baby? And through knowing him, I just met an appraiser, and I just thought, well, this sounds like such a cool job. I always loved math. I was really into math as all throughout elementary and through high school and stuff. And so I thought, numbers, I'm really good at that. I'm really good at organization. I'm detail-oriented. I can make my own hours. And, I always knew I wanted to be a mother, so I could be a working mother. I could work from home, make my own schedule. And so I said, I'm going to go for it. And I bought the online course. Little did I know that it's very difficult to find someone to actually train you and supervise you. So I was very green, and I didn't actually know what it took to become an appraiser. I'm glad that I didn't know, because I might not have chosen to do it if I really knew what it was going to take to become an appraiser. So I ended up being really lucky. I knocked on doors for about 6 months, called all the local appraisers, will you train me, will you train me? And everybody said no, because it takes a lot of work to train an appraiser. And it's actually a losing money proposition, because you take on all the liability and you don't make any extra money for bringing somebody on. I just happened to meet a local appraiser who didn't like to work alone. He liked to have somebody in the office. He liked to train, just to have that, somebody that he worked with that he could talk to, and he wasn't all by himself all day. So I got really lucky. I was trained by Michael Lasky. He also only worked in Santa Cruz County for about 25 years, but he's been retired since 2009.
Yeah, it's a small world. My first job while I was at UC Santa Cruz was with a guy named Jerry Bulfin, and Jerry Bulfin was a business partner with Michael Lasky. Back in the 1980s, they started a company called Advanced Water Systems, and then at some point, Michael went off to become an appraiser.
I think before that, he even sold solar. He did that, and then he did solar installation, and then he became an appraiser. That's right.
That's how he got into the water purification business, because these solar systems need to have very pure water that go into them. Otherwise, it gunks up the lines. And so the water system was sort of like a bolt-on to the solar business, just because they had that need. So, wow, it's a small world, huh? Yeah.
Yes.
So you are very lucky to get that, right? I mean, to have found somebody to be your, what is that, mentor, right? What's the actual word for it? There's a sponsor. What do they call it?
Supervisor.
Supervising appraiser, right? Because you need like 2,000 hours to get licensed, right? Is that correct?
So it was 2,000 hours when I got licensed. If I am correct, I believe it's 2,500 now.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's really hard. Go on.
You really do need that much time. You need that much experience. And actually, they're trying to get through, because it's really hard to find people to take on trainees, and also not all lenders will accept a trainee signature. There's 2 spots to sign at the bottom of the form, and on the left-hand side, you would have the trainee, and on the right-hand side, you'd have the supervisor. And like I mentioned before, the supervisor takes on all of the liability. So it used to be that you could send the trainee out to do the inspection, and you could actually get more homes inspected that way. And then when you were back in the office together, you would look over their work. But it's not like that anymore. The supervisor actually has to be on site at every single inspection now, legally. I know that there's cases where supervisors are not doing that because homeowners might not know that the trainee needs to have somebody on site with them. So now it truly is a losing money proposition, because you're taking on all the liability. You have to look over all their work, and it's not like you can just look at the appraisal and assume that they've chosen the correct comps and they've made accurate adjustments. You need to run the comps yourself and make sure that they haven't missed anything. So you really are putting a lot of work into it as a supervisor. So because of that, so many people aren't taking trainees on, and there are some people that are trying to like lenders and stuff, because it can be really quite a bottleneck when the interest rates drop and everybody decides they want to refinance at the same time. I know we experienced this in the late summer and fall of 2016. Everybody wanted to refinance when it got down into the, 3.25s and whatnot. And it was like a month or 6 weeks wait for an appraisal, and people are locking their rates. And so they're saying, hey, there's a shortage of appraisers. Let's let appraisers do a bunch of their supervisor hours in the classroom, like in a college classroom. And you can simulate a whole bunch of, situations in appraisal, but you're never going to be able to get the same experience in a classroom as you're going to get when you walk into houses, and when you really see what limited comps there are, when you really have to call agents and figure out, why houses sold for, because oftentimes you call up an agent and you say, why'd that house sell for so much, or why'd that house sit on the market for so long? And maybe it's one of those, everybody's throwing their hands up in the air and says, you tell me, God, I don't know. Or, or that house just had it. There was so much sunlight, and there was the way that it was situated on the lot, and the vibe of it, or whatever. You're like, vibe, $50,000.
Yeah, right. How do you adjust for the vibe?
How do you adjust for the vibe? So, in that kind of situation where something sells for a lot less or a lot more, you have to kind of consider those outliers. Maybe you give them some consideration, but you kind of throw out the really high ones and you throw out the really low ones.
Well, that's actually a really good question, because how do you adjust for the vibe of a place, right? I mean, like, there's so many houses that just have it, and then a lot that don't, right? So, I mean, what do you put on the adjustment column? What do you call it? You call it. I mean, I call it like, a view or sunlight, or, I don't know. What do you call it?
Right. So you guys can call it all sorts of different things. And, it's like when you see like quaint cottage, you're like, okay, that place is either a dump or it's really cute.
Or mold ridden.
So, that's the thing, right? So we all know that houses typically sell for more when you stage them. We're such an aesthetic species. So, vibe is, I'm really trying to not take that out of it, but really look at what the quality and the condition of the property is. And sometimes pictures can be really deceiving. Maybe I used a comp in an appraisal where there was a great description, there was no questions, the pictures were wonderful, and I perceived the property as a certain quality and condition. Then let's say a few weeks later, I'm going to use it in another appraisal, and I happen to be talking to this same agent that listed that other property. And they say, oh, well, those pictures were just amazing. Actually, that house was nowhere near as nice as it looked in the pictures. And you're like, oh, great, because we don't walk through all these houses like agents do. That's why it's really important. I mean, I know some appraisers who rarely call agents. I like to call agents a lot. You guys are the ones with the boots on the ground. You're talking to the buyers. You are walking through a whole bunch more properties than I walk through, and you know what's going on in the ins and outs of certain properties. Like if there's a funky floor plan or something, I don't know that. I only know the square footage and the bedroom-bathroom count.
Right. Yeah, no, it is important to walk through these properties and call agents. I mean, when I'm trying to figure out how much I'm going to suggest a list price for, I call up agents all the time and say, hey, why did that property sell for so much or sell for so little? And then you find, all the nitty-gritty that wasn't, publicly advertised anywhere. So
right, because you guys, you want everybody to come and walk through and make a decision for themselves.
Right.
So it's not like you're going to put in the description, really funky floor plan. Come check it out.
You're gonna love the bedroom off the kitchen. That's amazing.
Right.
You're gonna love that. Very convenient if you get hungry at night to get that midnight snack. Well, listen, Kristina, why do people get appraisals? I mean, obviously for buying or refinancing, right? But that can't be the only reason or the only time people get appraisals. What other needs do people have for an appraiser?
The other major needs for an appraisal are for estate planning purposes. So when somebody passes away and they need to set the value of the estate as of that day. And then other times are when, there's multiple parties that own a property and, one wants to get bought out. Like, let's say it was inherited by multiple siblings and now one's deciding that they want their money. And then, divorce reasons. Those are the big ones. A lot of times, sometimes I'll get referrals for when people are going to put a home on the market and they want to know what it's worth. And oftentimes in that situation, you don't need a legal document for that. And I always say, I'm willing to take your money and give you a legal document and tell you what it's worth. But your real estate agent, if you trust them enough to actually have them as your agent, then you can trust the information that they're going to give you because they have the same exact information as me. Right.
Okay, so we have for basically estates or putting it up for sale and maybe want to find out how much it's worth. How about like insurance, like you get called out for when there's fire damage or anything like that, or?
So insurance agents do that. That's not part of an appraiser's job. I mean, I don't know if insurance agencies have appraisers that go out, but that's not part of a typical appraiser's job.
Okay. All right. So what are the most challenging kinds of appraisals that you do? Like what really what gives you heartburn when you get the order? You're like, oh, God.
I would have to say number one is where there's been a grandfathered use. Like let's say the typical zoning is single-family residential, and you can have one auxiliary dwelling unit or guest house. Now, you come up against cases where they have that. They've got the two units, the main living house and the guest house, but they have a grandfathered third unit on the property that legally it's allowed to be occupied. They can rent it out. That becomes really challenging because, of course, that third unit has value to any buyer. And, the definition of market value is the most probable price, not the most possible, but the most probable. And so if any typical buyer is going to come out and look at a property, well, that third unit has value. So you've got to research, can they rebuild it if it were to be destroyed? So let's say there was a fire and they were going to use their insurance. Is zoning going to allow them to rebuild it? Just because they've grandfathered it and said, yes, you don't have to tear it down right now, doesn't mean they're going to let you rebuild it. And so I need to make sure that I'm not going to overvalue something. And then there's things like, bluff properties. Bluff properties are always really challenging. The retaining walls, seawall situations, really poor condition is another challenge. External obsolescence, like if you've got highway noise or you're on a really busy street, how does the market really respond to that? If there's nothing else that's right in that neighborhood, like right now I'm doing one on Treasure Island down in Aptos Beach Flats. And I mean, it's just, right there. And recently there was one that sold right at the apex of that stop sign where Spreckles comes down, and then there's the 2 stop signs for Treasure Island. And it's like, okay, they've got the 2 stop signs. They got people coming in that are going to turn up Spreckles, and they're not going to go down the rest of Treasure Island. Then they've got everybody that's going out, and they got everybody that's coming down Spreckles, and their headlights are shining right in the house when it's nighttime, and everybody that's trying to get off the freeway. If you've ever tried to cut through Rio Del Mar in the morning, that gets all backed up down through there. So that sat on the market forever, and I think it was listed at over $9 and ended up selling for $790. So when you've got, you say, well, okay, that's 3 stop signs, even though it's on Treasure Island Drive. It's not the same as just being down the road on Treasure Island. It doesn't have all the same influences of being at that stop sign. So you're just going to try to find something that's most similar, and it's not always easy.
Yeah, what about when you have this is common, on Freedom Boulevard maybe, or Mission Street, or you have a old Victorian that has sort of dual use, right? It's now commercially zoned, but it is a house, and the city will let you continue to use it as a house, right?
Right. So that's called
what is that called?
Legal non-conforming. So,
right.
So it used to be the legal zoning used to be single family. That's why there's a single family dwelling there. And then they did a sweeping rezoning of the area, and now it's zoned commercial. But they'll let you keep using it as a single family dwelling. They're not going to make you turn it into commercial use. But it's now considered legal non-conforming because it does not conform to the current zoning. So if you want to make any changes, you can remodel the inside, but if you wanted to add a garage, add square footage, they're not going to allow you to do any of that unless you're going to start using it for commercial use.
So how do you adjust for that when you're doing an appraisal on a property like that? Because there's so few properties that are like that, really, especially ones that have sold recently or are on the market.
So when you do an appraisal, one of the number one questions that you're asking is, what's the purpose of the appraisal is number one. But then, number 2 is what's the highest and best use of this property? And there are 4 questions that you have to ask for highest and best use. And that is it physically possible? Is it legally permissible? Is it financially feasible? And is it the most productive use of the site? So if I personally, as a residential appraiser, I am not licensed to do commercial appraisals. So if something is zoned commercial, I can't actually answer if it is being used under its highest and best use, because I would need to perform a research analysis whether it would sell for more, would it be worth more if it was being used for commercial use.
Wow, so if there's a property like that, you can't appraise it. Is that?
I know that other residential appraisers might go out and appraise it, but I don't think they're doing it their job 100%. I think that you would really have to be able to analyze whether it would be worth more if it used it under commercial use. And in that analysis is what commercial use? Is it going to be best as a liquor store, as a dentist's office, as a gas station? Because you could turn it into anything. I mean, you can't turn it into anything, of course. Gas stations and whatnot, you can't have them in all places. But, what's going to bring its highest value? Right.
Wow, interesting. I did not realize that. That's new for me. So let me ask you this. When I get an appraisal done, sometimes the appraiser will say, okay, the value is, $700,000, but you have to carry out some repairs. And this is a moment of angst for many realtors and homeowners because they're like, what's the appraiser going to say? So does it really happen all that often where you actually say, well, you'll have to do, X, Y, and Z in order to, have this be considered the value?
Right. So that's called subject to completion. So in the report, you have to answer whether there are any health and safety concerns. I'm not going to take in, that you need to paint the trim in your house because it's totally torn up. That's part of quality and condition. But if there's a situation where, let's say some that I've had to call out, like there's a large drop off from a retaining wall and there's no railing that's securing anybody from falling off that and getting really hurt. That is a health and safety concern. And so I will call it out and I take pictures and I say, anything above 30 inches requires a 36-inch railing. And I only know that from speaking with a lot of inspectors. I'll call an inspector up and say, hey, I've got this situation where the drop-off is this far, and what would they require that you're supposed to do? Because I'm not a code inspector. And so there's a lot of, cover your butt comments in an appraisal, that says, it appears that the smoke detectors are installed properly, but I am not a code inspector.
Yeah, I see those comments a lot. So you mentioned flaking paint. What if you suspect that the paint is lead paint and it's flaking off? So is that something you would call out?
So if it's built before 1978, then it's something that should be called out. It's typically not. I haven't really come up against that problem that often, but it's usually only something that's called out in FHA appraisals.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Okay. So now, speaking of that, when a lot of times there might be some flaking paint or like a wire that's exposed or something like that. So
exposed wiring. Yeah.
So what kind of things should homeowners be aware of before an appraiser comes out, just to save themselves the angst and maybe a reinspection? Okay. What kind of things do people need to be worried about that you're going to be looking for? Common things, obviously.
So you need to make sure that nothing is under construction. So you don't have a wall opened up because you were going to change the vanity and you didn't put all the drywall back and now you can see studs right there. That's not finished. That has got to be repaired. So don't have anything under construction. And many, many, many times I've been to houses where they said, let's say they got into a DIY project and they decided they were going to tear up all the flooring in the bathroom and they were going to retile it themselves, but they tore it up 3 months ago and they haven't gotten to it. Now they decided they want to refinance and they've just been living with it like that for the last 3 months and they don't even think about it. And you walk in the house and you say, no floor coverings in here. And they're like, oh, well, is that a problem? And it's like, well, it's a problem for this because they need it to be finished. So I've had floor coverings has got to be the number one thing that people have ripped up and not completed, and then they want to go do a refinance, and now they're scrambling to get it done before. And there's been situations where, let's say somebody said, yeah, we're going to do this refinance and we're going to remodel the kitchen, so let's just start demoing right now. It's like, no, don't demo until your loan is closed. Don't do anything.
Right. Yeah, good advice. All right. So speaking of remodeling and whatnot, what kind of improvements are most cost-effective when you want to add value to your property? Because this comes up a lot when you're getting a house ready for sale, and people want to go hog wild and just do all kinds of stuff to their house. But I know that only a few improvements really give you a significant bang for the buck. What are those? What can people do to really boost the appraised value of their house?
I'd say the number one things are
cost-effectively.
Right.
Yeah. So,
kitchens, bathrooms, and flooring and windows are like the big things, So if you've got you're definitely not going to get your value out of putting like $80,000 or $100,000 into the kitchen. But there are really cheap ways to do a great kitchen upgrade. So you could do all new appliances and paint your cabinets and put new pulls on it and maybe put a nice, a new countertop and a new sink on there. You can do a really cost-effective upgrade to your kitchen without having to do all new cabinetry, as long as you've got, higher quality, good condition cabinets that you could refinish or paint. Those are the best ways because now everything looks clean and fresh and new, and the buyer's going to say, this is great, instead of it looking like the 1970s when you walk in. So kitchens, bathroom upgrades, and flooring upgrades. I mean, it seems to me like over the years that, engineered hardwood flooring, not like that cheaper Pergo, but the nicer stuff that people really like. If you're going to throw cheaper Pergo in there, you might as well just you just keep it the old carpet,
Right.
But flooring, and then windows, windows can often be, they really, in my perspective, I always take it into consideration if people have replaced their windows or not. And especially if there's failing windows and, a lot of those old aluminum windows that are 30 years or more, the tracks are mildewing and there's issues going on. And so that's a big one.
Yeah, I got a house that I have in contract now, and we had like 6 open houses on it, and like almost everybody came through and said like, wow, the windows are really old, It's like, well, it's a great house, but like so many people, I've never had so many people comment on old windows before. But let me ask you this: what about like a roof, right? So let's just say you have a 30-year roof and it's 30 years old, and you replace it. What does that do? Does that add any value to your property? I mean, let's just say it costs $10,000 for a roof. Is that going to add $15,000 to the value, or? I
would have to say no. That's going to be taken into like overall quality and condition. So if you're selling the house and the roof is still serviceable and it is not leaking, then unless it's like a glaring issue, like you can see the roof from the front and the roof looks like a problem, then that might really affect it. But if the roof is not like a main visual of the house and it's not leaking, then that's just overall. Replacing it is like, okay, you guys have a new roof. That's like up the overall quality and condition. But it's not like saying, you have an upgraded kitchen as compared to a 1970s kitchen that still has the old yellow stove.
So there's like an appraisal, right? There's quality and condition, right? Those are like C1 through C6. Is that how that works?
That's right. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. So the roof is condition and not quality.
Right. Well, it's kind of both. So if you've got a really high-end, like what a stone-tiled roof, or
one of those new solar, the Tesla solar roofs.
Yes. Honestly, that would be amazing, and it would be considered an over-improvement. There's no way you're going to get all your money out of that. So that's what I'm saying about the $100,000 kitchen. Like my mom did this just insane custom kitchen, and it's beautiful and it's amazing, and she'll never get her money out of it. But she doesn't care because she's staying there and she wants the kitchen the way she wants the kitchen. So that's fine. If you want to spend $80,000 or $100,000 in your kitchen, go for it. But don't expect that you're going to get that out when you sell. And we can't always, predict what's going to happen in our lives and when we're going to have to sell.
Right. Exactly. So we kind of mentioned this earlier, but, like views, right? So like you hear, like I have $1 million view, but there are very few views that are actually worth $1 million. So how do you you mentioned bluff properties, right? So you have a property on the bluff and it's a full on ocean view, and you have one that's around the corner and it has half an ocean view. So how do you make an adjustment like that? I mean, this is kind of something that really confounds me, right?
Right, and it might be $1 million view. But truthfully, when I'm doing bluff properties, I have very, very rarely would ever use any property that wasn't on the bluff. So I'm going to go all the way across the county. If you've got a property on Opal Cliff or Pleasure Point or somewhere, Sea Cliff, Aptos, and there's a difference between being on the sand. So if you're like on Via Gaviota and you're down on the sand, then you're going to want to find something else that's similar, like on Las Olas or Potbelly Beach. But, Potbelly Beach, that's in and of itself, it's its own world. It's a co-op. You can't even get a loan down there. So, but what I'm saying is you're going to try to find a similar location, because the people who are going to pay those millions of dollars for the bluff, they're not going to buy a house that has half a view. You're looking for the same buyer. You're looking for properties that would attract the same buyer.
Right. Interesting point. Well, that sort of answers that. But it can be so challenging, though, right? I mean, what if there are no recent bluff sales, right? I mean, or maybe there's a bluff sale, but it's, 3 times the size of a house or twice the size of a lot. There's just so many variables in there.
There's so many variables in there. And Joe, just like recently, there was one in Capitola that sold up on Depot Hill. And if I'm remembering correctly, it was like almost a half acre or something. And it sold for like $3.7. But that cliffside is shedding at such a fast rate that if you wanted to do any work on that property, the city of Capitol is going to make you pick it up and move it 90 feet back from the bluff.
Wow.
Because it's shedding at such a rate. So there's so many different complexities to bluff properties. Like, if they're recently, I didn't call him. I believe it was with Larry Haddis, but there's a property I just saw in Rio Del Mar that was listed for 2.6, and it's all the way down now listed for 1.25. And there's a comment in there that only part of the cliff has an engineered seawall. So there are so many different complexities for properties on the bluff when it comes to seawalls and how much work you can do on it. And you got to do your research. You really got to have the experience doing those properties.
Yeah, well, actually, this is another kind of tangent, but how long does it take you to do an appraisal on a property like this? I mean, could you spend 15 hours on an appraisal? Is that unheard of? Or because they're normally like 3 hours, 4 hours, something like that?
I'd say most appraisals are maybe like 3 or 4 hours in the office. I'm outsourcing some of that. I'm paying somebody else to do that to limit my time and up my productivity. But I'd say 15 hours. I've probably spent 15 hours on some really, really, nasty, hard appraisals. But that would be like high end, really top.
Right.
And it's more because it's such a complex puzzle that I think I have it figured out, and I really need to sleep on it and think about the different aspects and what properties I'm appraising it to and how wide I'm going to cast my net across the county, what other pockets in the county might be similar that I could find something that is that atypical. Like, if you've got a property that's got 10 acres and 5 of it is completely flat, and you have a 3,800 square foot, totally decked out estate style home, and you have an amazing, unbelievable, 10 stall horse barn, and they have a guest house, and they have arena, and they have horse boarding facilities, and and they've got amazing views across the county somewhere in Corralitos, you're like, oh my God, I'm never going to find anything like this. And you have to keep opening your mind, and how far back are you going to go? And sometimes I'm just calling agents and telling them the property that I'm working on. And do you know of anything like this? And they say, oh, something like that sold in Bonnie Doon 18 months ago. And, and then you start to go, and you find a property that I would have never considered maybe going all the way up to Bonnie Doon for a property in Corralitos. But then you go, oh my gosh, this house is totally similar. And so then you start to take another look at the way you've been perceiving it. And so now you start appraising the property all over again. So
right.
That's when you get those big hours.
Right. So, one fear that a lot of agents have, especially in a market like this one, where you get a lot of offers and properties end up selling wildly over list price, is, will it appraise, right? So how often, you get the contract, right? When there's a sale transaction, you get a copy of the contract, so you know how much it's going to, what the sale price is. How often do you come in under contract price? Is that really something that happens very often?
To me, there's, it's the most probable price, not the most possible. And sometimes people do go wild and crazy on properties and really spend more than what they're worth. But my perspective is, who am I? Who am I to tell you that this property is not worth, we're talking about $800,000 and I'm going to bring it in for $790. I hear about those stories all the time. Well, there's times where you just can't find that $10,000 because let's say there just happens to be really recent sales of really similar properties right there in the neighborhood, and you just can't prove it. You have to do bracket. That's what it's called. You bracket the property. So let's say it's a 2,000 square foot house. You're going to find an 1,800 square foot house, and you're going to find a 2,200 or 24 or 25 or whatever is around. And you're going to come down on square footage, and you're going to come up on square footage. Then, it'd be great if all the sales were 2,000 square feet and they had the same remodeling and all that. But you don't find that. You usually find something that has similar quality and condition maybe, but maybe you just find something that has superior quality and condition and inferior quality and condition, and then you're making adjustments to balance it out. So let's say you've got the 2,000 square foot house. On the low end, you have a 1,500 square foot house. And on the high end, you have a 2,500 square foot house. Now you're saying, let's do a sensitivity analysis. I'm going to put $100 a square foot into my adjuster on my program, and it balances to a certain level. Oh, okay, this one's hanging a little bit low, and that one's hanging a little bit high. What if I put in $150 a square foot? What if I put in $125 a square foot? But there's times where you use a certain adjustment, and it brings one property up close to the contract price, but it brings another property down below the contract price. And you can't, and there's just not enough variables to make it balance out. And everything just hangs a little bit lower than the contract price. Well, then I cannot prove that it's worth it. And that's what my job is. The definition of an appraisal is an estimated opinion of value. It's not that I'm saying this is exactly what this house is worth and there's no way to argue it in any other way. But what the problem is, too, with appraising is that we're dealing in the past. Although we're saying this is the effective date of the appraisal and you're looking at all the data that's available to you as of today, I don't know if, like, let's say there's a pending sale today and it was listed for $800,000 and it closes tomorrow for $850,000. I don't know that today, right? So we're dealing with the past. Some properties go into contract, 2 months ago. The price was negotiated 2 months before it, and then it closes a month ago, and now I'm looking at it a month after it closed, or 2 months after it closed. So I might be looking a full 6 months in the past, and then you're trying to look at statistical data and extrapolate how much the market is appreciating or depreciating, or if it's stable, and you're applying appreciation. But everything that you do in appraisal, you have to be able to defend it in a court of law. So I can't just say, oh, look, well, it's in contract for $800,000. If I use 1% a month in market appreciation, I can make it work. I've got to prove that. I need the statistical data saved in my work file that proves that I can use 1% a month.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what would you say? I mean, is it a justified fear that people really have to worry about low appraisals, or is it really? Does it happen that much? In my job, it does not happen that much for me in my office doing appraisals. It has to be really glaringly not worth it for me to say this just isn't worth it. Right? And I can say, like, in the past, I did a property in Rio Del Mar that had an ocean view, but it was, over a tar and gravel rooftop with power lines through it of one little bay. This was not, a panoramic view. The house had 3 different levels, and not only that, they were kind of broken up, so you'd have to walk like 5 stairs and you were in this room, and then like down 10 stairs and you were in that room, and then back up those 10 stairs and up another 10 stairs and you're in another living area. And it was in contract for like 1.95 or something like that. This is a couple years ago now. And there was nothing truly similar. And so it was one of those situations where you're like, well, the quality is so high. I'm not going to find anything that has that floor plan. And I really don't know how to approach that. But I just felt it was just not worth it. So I brought it in something like in the 1.7s or something like that, or 1.8, not that much below, but the seller wouldn't sell. It went off the market. It went back on the market a period of time later and sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than what I had even appraised it for. Later, after market appreciation. Right.
Because they just happened to have a buyer at that time that felt it was worth what the seller was putting it out there for, and he wasn't willing to go any less, and who knows what their situation was. They couldn't find another ocean property, or they wanted that quality or whatever it was. They wanted the neighborhood. So there is a point where the appraiser plays the brakes in the situation,
Right. Yeah, I always tell my clients, don't worry about the appraiser. The appraiser is not there to torpedo your deal. They're gonna tell you, what they think the value is, and if it supports the contract price, they're not going to be trying to disprove the value. They're going to try and prove that the value is there.
And really, my job is to assess the risk of the lender. When we're talking about a federally related transaction, we're talking about a loan, someone purchasing, someone refinancing. But also in a purchase situation, I did my job. I protected that buyer from overpaying. Just because somebody says, a seller says, my house is worth $2 million, and they have a buyer that comes in and says, oh, they put it on the market for $2 million. It must be worth $2 million, and they're willing and able to pay that. It doesn't mean it's worth it. If you're going to get a loan on it and you're not going to put cash down and you don't care if you're overpaying for it, unless you're paying cash, an appraiser has to come in and prove that it's worth it, because the definition of market value is not the most possible price. It's the most probable. What most educated and prudent buyers would be willing to pay for the same or similar property.
Right. Great. So, the real estate market has changed a lot since the great housing crash of 2007, 2008, subprime mortgage, whatever you want to call it. So how has the appraisal business changed since that time?
Oh, the appraisal business has changed massively. So it used to be that we had relationships with loan officers, and loan officers would call you up and say, I need you to do this deal for me. And we talked openly. You weren't supposed to, but we did talk openly about them saying, we need $800,000 for this deal. And you'd say, could I make $800,000 work on this deal? And almost all appraisers did that. This was back when I was still with my supervisor, and I just, did what he did, right? He was teaching me the ropes. And then came out the Home Valuation Code of Conduct, the HVCC, and they put a middleman in between the appraiser and the loan officer, and that middleman is called the appraisal management company. And so the lender has to send the job to the appraisal management company. The appraisal management company sends the job to me. I send it back to them. They have all their quality and control, and then they send it to the lender. And we communicate through them. So if I need preliminary title for some reason, then I ask the appraisal management company for it, and then they go to the lender and get it for me. And we're not supposed to talk to each other, and we can talk to each other now as long as we're not talking about value. We can talk to each other about the difficulties of the loan, not the loan itself, but the property. Like, let's say, a lender could call me up, a loan officer, and say, this is going on at the property. What do you think about that? There's a converted garage. How are you going to deal with it? And you say, well, I'm just going to say it's a converted garage. How's your lender going to deal with it?
Right. So, yeah, it's changed a whole lot since the mortgage crisis. You have these appraisal management companies, and how does that...
Cost.
The cost, right, yeah.
Right. So when the appraisal management company came in, appraisers have been being paid the same since the 1990s. There has been no, raise in the fee that the appraiser gets. We typically get paid around $400 for an appraisal. Sometimes, $350 would be on the really low side. I personally do not work for that low. Up to maybe $375 for a typical appraisal, and we can go, higher for really complex jobs, even up to $1,000 or $1,200 or $1,500 for, let's say, a 10,000 square foot house. So, what first happened when that middleman came in is they just took a portion of the fee. They said up to 40%. We're taking 25% of that. So there was a period of time where we were only getting paid $240, and we had to fight. The Appraisal Institute had to fight in Congress and everything to get it to be so that there was an extra fee. So now, yes, buyers and homeowners who are refinancing or obtaining a loan, they have to pay a lot of money, and I don't actually know what they pay. Sometimes they pay like $700 for an appraisal. Yeah. I am not making that. I am typically making $400, maybe $425 on a typical average appraisal.
Right. Yeah, and the appraisal management companies are getting a nice slice. Yeah, I remember that when that first happened, that the appraisal rates were basically the same, and that appraisers were losing out like 40%, and a lot of appraisers got out of the business at that time.
Yep, there was a huge attrition. A lot of people were just like, I'm ready to retire, and that's actually what happened to Michael Lasky. He was like, I'm not working for that much. I'm done.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what's the most difficult appraisal you've ever had to do in your whole entire career? Is there anyone that sticks out that was like...
God, the most difficult appraisal that I've ever done. I should have thought of this earlier. I should have researched it. I always get the difficult ones, and I call people up. I call Kenny Welcher. He's another local, really great appraiser, and I'll be like, I've got this situation. He's like, you always get the terrible ones.
Well, they're all terrible here at Santa Cruz. I mean, like, it's a nightmare. It's an appraiser's nightmare at this town, right? Like, I mean, if you worked in San Jose, it'd be easy, right? Man. You could be asleep and do appraisals.
Well, if you worked in all the, in the cookie cutter little neighborhoods, but I'd have to say, like some of the hardest ones, like I recently did a duplex on the Bluff, on East Cliff, and these were two totally like detached houses attached only through a breezeway, like a porch breezeway. And both of them had full panoramic ocean views. But they would not allow them to split the lot and make it two separate houses. So it's held in title as a duplex. The difference between a single family with a guest unit and a duplex is that legally you can rent both of the units out. So in that situation, of course, I'm not going to find any other duplexes across the county on the Bluff. So I did find one in Capitola that was a single family with a guest unit, and I had to use it, even though the guest unit was only, a one-bedroom tiny little cottage. It was 2 units on the Bluff with ocean views. There's times where...
That's kind of tricky to do, though, right? I mean, my understanding is they want you to always use the same property type, right? They want you to comp single family against single family or multifamily against multifamily, but... You actually have some discretion in that? I mean, you have to fight
you just have to explain, so it becomes really narrative. And each comparable is going to have a couple of paragraphs as to why you chose it. And you might even, if you really want to do your job really well and not have underwriters coming back to you and asking questions, is you might put in a list of other properties that were nearby and why you didn't use them, which... That's not truly my job. My job is to pick out the properties that are most similar and explain why I did use them. But if you really want to, just get it all done at the same time instead of having someone come back to you on the back end, like when your mind is in it and you're looking at all these jobs, or all these potential comparables, you could write a sentence or two about these are other recent sales and I didn't use them for this reason.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that on appraisals before. So, let's see here. We have this problem a lot in Santa Cruz County, which is unpermitted improvements to a house, which is interesting because a lot of the times you won't really have any knowledge if a particular improvement has been permitted or not. But sometimes you do know that like maybe a room was added on or something like that. So how do you go and adjust for unpermitted improvements versus permitted improvements?
So really, it depends on market reaction and the workmanship of the construction and how it flows in the floor plan. So if you go to a house and it was originally built as a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and they've added on a master bedroom and bathroom, so now it's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath home, and they added it on to code. It was built really well, just like by a contractor, and just like it would have been if it was permitted. Of course, you didn't have all the code inspections along the way as it was being constructed, but it looks like it was built with high quality of craftsmanship, and it flows within the floor plan. Well, then any potential buyer is going to say, well, this is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They're not buying a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. And so then you just have to argue. As an appraiser, my job is to argue and prove that market response is the same. And so I can't just say that. I have to prove it. I have to go back and find something that has unpermitted square footage to bracket it. It's just like a converted garage. So if you've got a garage and you've converted it and now it's a family room or it's a bedroom and bathroom or whatever it is, I need to find another property that has a converted garage and show that it sold for, a comparable amount to any other square footage.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Which is less typical. It's easier if, let's say there is it's the same floor plan. Let's say it's 1,000 square feet and there's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, but they have bootlegged in a bathroom, but it really flows within the floor plan, but they didn't add any square footage. That's easier for the lender to swallow. It's easier for them to say, okay, they didn't add any they didn't construct any gross living area, because who am I? Like I said, I'm not a code inspector and I'm not a contractor. So I'm only looking from the outside saying it looks as though it was built in a workmanlike manner. They're less, some lenders are really picky and they might not accept unpermitted square footage. But as an appraiser, my job is to ask the question is, how does the market respond? So there's some really prudent buyers, and they want to see the permits, and they're not going to purchase a house that doesn't have permits. Like the property that I personally own, it had damage to the foundation in the 1989 earthquake. You can see that they pulled the permit to have the foundation repaired, and the foundation is repaired, but the permit went void. It was never finalized. So you don't know if the county came out and did any of their inspections along the construction process. We don't know if there's, a certain number of rebar in there. We don't know all that stuff. But we say, hey, it looks great. They pulled the permits in the first place. They probably had it built by a contractor wonderfully. We're just going to trust that it's up to snuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I could go on and on about this question, like what if there's a house where they built an illegal granny unit and it's, non-conforming, like the county or the city would never approve that structure. I mean, do they...
Okay, so in my perspective, that's a big deal. I cannot give value to a second unit as a second unit if it's not permitted. Because if the county comes in and red tags that and makes you, let's say it's a whole structure, they make you tear the whole structure down, or they make you gut it and use it only as a garage or, bonus room, then I can be overvaluing a property. So this is where it gets to be a problem for appraisers is, let's say I don't do my due diligence. I just go out to the property and they tell me, oh, no, that's legal. And you go, okay, fine, it's legal. Because they don't always show up on public record. Even legal guest units don't always show up on my public record. I have to call the assessor and say, oh, do you have, a guest unit on there? And as a side note to this, the assessor will assess you for whatever you have on the property, whether it's legal and permitted or not. They're going to get their money from you. The assessor and the planning department did not talk to each other. So if I really want to know if it's permitted, then I need to call the planning department and say, hey, there's a second unit out of this property. Can you find any permits for that?
Wow.
And then I get the permit number or don't.
I have been led to believe that appraisers never call the planning department or the building department. So I call the planning department on a regular basis around things like square footage. Like, let's say, you go out to a property and the public record says it's 800 square feet. I do want to get back to the second unit thing because I want to tell you what I was going to say, so I don't want to forget about that. Okay.
But let's say you go out to a property and public record says it's 800 square feet, but now you have a 1,500 square foot house. And they say, well, it was like this when we bought it. I don't know, And let's say I know that this lender is very, very picky. Sometimes I can say in an appraisal, Santa Cruz County is notoriously inaccurate for their property descriptions on homes that are this age, like 50 years or older, because that is true. They're not always accurate. If I really want to know, then I need to call the planning department and see if they have any permits. And that's not going to open a can of worms. The planning department is way too busy and understaffed to be, trying to get send out red tags to every property that they get notified of. They only notified of is in the way that I call in. The only way to trigger a red tag is if you get a complaint, like you have a neighbor or somebody turns you in about it. So back to the illegal guest unit thing. So let's say I don't do my due diligence and I go out to a property where there's an illegal guest unit and they tell me that it's legal and I just assume it's legal. Let's say I appraise the property for $900,000. Now the property values decline. And 2 years later, the house is only worth $600,000, and they lose their job, and they're unable to pay their mortgage, and now it goes into foreclosure. So at the time that it goes in foreclosure, the lender says, how can I recoup my losses? When's the last time this got appraised? Let's look at that appraisal. Now they have somebody on staff or that they've contracted, another appraiser, that will do an appraisal of the property as of that day. And so if they find out that I overvalued the property for any reason, it doesn't even have to be just because of the guest unit, but the guest unit is a big deal because this is a valuable amenity, then they can come after my errors and omissions insurance because I omitted and I made an error. And we have to carry $1 million of errors and omissions insurance in order to do federally related transactions. Now I've got something against my errors and omissions insurance, and there's going to be a whole host of people who are no longer going to allow me onto their panel.
Right. Wow. So you got to be very, very careful.
It really is a cover your butt and a liability. You always have to think of your liability as an appraiser. That's what they've really made it into ever since the decline, because they put a lot of scrutiny on the fact that, well, if appraisers weren't overvaluing all of these properties, then we wouldn't be in this mess. Right.
Yeah, this conversation has a lot to do about adjusting value and how do you value this and how do you value that, because this is something that, I spend a lot of time thinking about. So let me just ask you this. This is a pretty softball question. I'm sure there must be a very easy answer for it. Let's just say you have two houses that are side by side and they're the same size lot and the same square footage, but one house has 2 bedrooms and the other house has 3 bedrooms, right? Same age of construction, same quality. How do you differentiate the value of just having a couple of extra walls up and making a bedroom? How does that? Because you see in appraisal forms adjustment for bedroom count.
Right. So everybody wants the third bedroom, right? The third bedroom is much more desirable. So even though they're right next to each other and they have the same quality and the condition and they have the same lot size and everything, I am going to try my hardest to only use 3-bedroom comps or to only use 2-bedroom comps. But if I have to use the property next door, and typically the adjustment for a bedroom, it's not like there's an across-the-board adjustment in every appraisal I use $10,000, It's not like that. It's like, well, like you said, there's the same exact square footage. Sometimes if there's like 1,000-square-foot house and a 1,500-square-foot, like 1,000-square-foot 2-bedroom and a 1,500-square-foot, 100-square-foot 3-bedroom, you can't just adjust for the bedroom because you're also adjusting for the gross living area. So let's say you're coming down $50,000 for the gross living area where the bedroom is in that gross living area. If the bedroom, so you're going to make a slightly smaller adjustment for the bedroom. It's typically anywhere between, $20,000, $30,000 because there's typically other adjustments. It's not that common that you have a 1,500-square-foot 2-bedroom. Usually they're like 1,200 or 1,000. So it's typically, and the thing is that when values go up, adjustments go up. When values go down, they go down in different pocket neighborhoods. And what has most recently sold. So typically maybe $20,000, $25,000 just for the bedroom, even though a lot of times a 3-bedroom house is going to sell for a lot more than that because there's the square footage adjustment too.
Right. Got it. Well, Kristina, I've taken up an awful lot of your time today. You've been very generous. I really appreciate it. If someone wants to get an appraisal, how do they get a hold of you?
they can email me at coasthomeappraisal@gmail.com. That's Coast, as in the coast of California, Coast Home Appraisal, singular, @gmail. Or you can call me at 831-247-7223. I do not have a website. I don't need one. I have plenty of work. I've never had to host a website.
Right.
I own the domain, but I've never built it.
One day, maybe. So before we finish up here, is there anything else you think that people should know about Appraisal or you, or anything that you want to plug before we sign off here?
The other things that, people need to know if they're refinancing or purchasing is that these days you do have to have a smoke detector and a carbon monoxide detector on every level of the house, and your water heater must have 2 straps. So those are things that are going to need to get done, and they actually will have to get called out in an appraisal if you don't have them. Sometimes lenders will accept it if you don't have it. The other thing is about cleaning your house. So your house does not need to be perfectly clean to have an appraiser come over, but aesthetics make an impression. So when a lender sees a house that there's stuff all over the place, there is a perception of how you care for your house if you're leaving it in that way. And an appraiser can't see the house as well as they could if it weren't cleaned up. So if it were cleaned up, So, I always say you don't have to clean your house, but it is nice if you do clean your house when an appraiser comes over. If you keep it picked up, it's not like we're talking spit shine, but just, pick up the laundry and make it look nice, presentable, like you would if you were going to go out on a nice date. You put on your nice clothes.
Yeah, I just had a miracle appraisal deal closed yesterday, and the house was just full of stuff, like not from floor to ceiling, but from floor to mid-ceiling maybe, and it was just like, oh my goodness, like how can the appraiser measure this? How can they, what are they going to say? And the water heater was not strapped. They didn't call it out. Hey, and they didn't call out the smoke detectors or the carbon monoxide detectors.
That's amazing. Some lenders, some lenders don't care.
Sometimes it's an arbitrary process. Humans are involved.
That makes me think of what was the worst house I've ever appraised, which it had to have been, the 2 true hoarder situations that I've been to. And it's not that it was the most difficult property. It's that it's so sad to be in those, especially when there's like the cats and the cat feces and like all that stuff. So that's really challenging because you have to actually say, that there's a pet odor problem. How are you going to bracket that? You don't know what the extent of repairs are going to be needed. Is the subfloor absolutely saturated with cat urine, and is it going to need to be replaced? Are you going to be able to use like a kills primer that kills the odor? And the other really hard thing to appraise is smoke smell as well. When someone has smoked in a property for 30 years, that adversely affects things, and finding something this similar, it's challenging, and you do have to mention it.
Right. Yeah, there's so much to it, really, and then a lot of it is luck of the draw, right? We got an appraiser for that deal, I guess, that didn't care about any of those things which you're supposed to care about, or if you get a diligent appraiser like you, it could be a problem. So I really appreciate you pointing that out, because that is actually an
Great.
important...
Now I'm just causing problems because I'm doing my job. No, but honestly, I tell people on the phone, I say, you need to have a carbon monoxide detector and a smoke detector. And usually, I don't call it out. Everybody has a smartphone, you say, go get the carbon monoxide detector and send me a picture of it,
Right.
So usually it's a really easy fix for those things. But if you don't want to deal with it and you just want to have everything all buttoned up and smooth, then, you have those things in place before you get a refinance. This is only for federally related transactions. Of course, for estate appraisals, you don't need a smoke detector, but you should have one.
Of course. All right. Well, Kristina, thank you so much. And I hope everyone listening can really gain some appreciation in the appraisal business, and that, appraisers are just people too, like Kristina. They're just doing the best they can, and they do great work, especially Kristina. So thank you so much. If you want to get a hold of Kristina, just email her at coasthomeappraisal@gmail.com. And also we'll have her contact information on the show notes. So thank you so much Kristina, for all your time. I really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you again soon.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care.
All right, and that's it for episode number 6 of the Beta Bay Podcast. As always, the Beta Bay Podcast is sponsored by thesoldbook.com. Visit thesoldbook.com to get your free copy of my book, Get It Sold, all about how to sell your home quickly, easily, for top dollar, and to have a good time doing it. Hey, thanks so much for listening. I'll be in touch.